Hello and welcome to the Fair Districts PA brief refresher session about redistricting, gerrymandering, and reform efforts. My name is Jean Handley, and I'm the Dauphin County Coordinator for Fair Districts PA, and I'm also the South Central Region contact person. For reference, this is being recorded on March 9th, 2026. The next few months are critical in achieving initial passage of redistricting reform legislation by our state legislature. This PA constitutional amendment legislation creates an independent citizens commission for both state legislative and congressional districts. We thank you for your interest and efforts to help advocate for this legislation. This is a brief refresher session on redistricting, gerrymandering, past advocacy efforts, current legislation, and why the next few months are so important. Whether you are preparing to write postcards, volunteering at a tabling event, talking to legislators, or just want to review, we hope this information will be helpful. So on that note, let's get started. The redistricting process starts with reapportionment. And reapportionment is the federal process for allocation of the U.S. congressional seats. There are 435 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, and they are reallocated every 10 years after the census. And this determines the number of congressional districts for each state. Some states lose seats, some gain seats, and some remain the same based on population in relation to the other states. And let me give you an example. In 1990, after that census, we had 21 congressional seats for Pennsylvania. After the 2000 census, it went to 19. 2010, it went to 18. 2020, it went to 17, and who knows what it's going to be after 2030. So because of reapportionment, redistricting is necessary. And most states also do their state legislative districts at the same time because there are shifts in population within the states and different other things that will affect the districts. Pennsylvania is interesting because it has two separate processes, one for congressional redistricting and one for state legislative redistricting. And so I'm going to go through those two processes, but they are totally different. We're going to start with congressional redistricting. And we have currently 17 seats, as I mentioned, congressional seats for Pennsylvania. And the process is a simple bill process. The majority party defines what the districts are going to be, and they draw the maps, and they put them into a bill, regular bill, and it's voted on by the state Senate and the state House, and then it is sent to the governor for their signature. There is very little as far as guidelines for this process, and this is not in the PA Constitution, by the way. The only guidelines are that they must be nearly equal in population. So the congressional districts are within one person of each other in Pennsylvania and basically across the United States and the other states. And it must not dilute the voting power of ethnic or minority groups based on the Voting Rights Act of 1965. What happens if the governor vetoes it? Well, if the governor vetoes it, the bill is sent back to the state legislature where they are to come up with a new bill that has districts that will be acceptable to both the state legislature and to the governor. If they cannot do that, they can't come up with that, then the process is taken over by the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, and they will decide what the districts will be. They will either hire someone to draw maps, or they will look at a map that someone has possibly submitted or already exists. If the chambers can't agree, well, let's say the original bill, the chambers can't agree, then it will go to the state Supreme Court. Or if it's sent back to the legislature and they can't agree, once again, it goes to the Supreme Court. And it's very possible that that happens because we have a split government in Harrisburg, at least right now, where the Democrats control the House and the Republicans control the Senate. But you can see in this process that it involves the legislators, it involves the governor, and it involves potentially the Supreme Court. The state legislative redistricting is in the PA Constitution, some guidelines for it. We have 203 House seats and 50 Senate districts. And there are, every 10 years, a 5-member legislative reapportionment commission is constituted. And it's made up of the majority and the minority party leaders in the House and the minority and the majority party of the Senate for their designees. And they're supposed to pick the 5th member, which would be the chair. And that is a non-legislator and hopefully is fair-minded and transparency-oriented. But you can probably see that there is a problem with this because you have 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats trying to agree on someone. And it has never happened since 1968 when this process was put into place. So what happens if they can't agree? The PA Supreme Court appoints the chair. And the party affiliation of the chair can determine which party controls the redistricting process. I'm not saying it will, but it possibly can. An example of that, let's say the chair is a Democrat, they may tend to side or prioritize what the Democrats want in the maps. And if it's a Republican, they may favor what the Republicans would like to see. Some other things, there is no vote by the legislature, there is no approval by the governor, and the decision of these 5 people is final unless the courts overturn it. Gerrymandering. It is drawing district boundaries to benefit a party or a candidate. And no presentation would be complete without Elbridge Gerry, the governor of Massachusetts in 1812. And he approved districts that favored his political party, which was the Democrat-Republican Party. And the Boston paper at the time drew a cartoon of those districts, and it looked very much like a salamander. And so the term gerrymandering was coined. Elbridge Gerry, salamander, gerrymandering. But the process had been going on for long before this, and it even dates back to England. Those drawing the maps have a vested interest in creating districts that keep them in office and their party in the majority. And it's all about power and control and money. If you have the majority in a state or in a legislative body, you're going to have power and you're going to have an awful lot of control. You'll have control over the legislative agenda. You'll have control over the legislative rules. You'll have control over what bills get a vote or get passed. You will have control over other legislators, their office personnel, your campaign funds, where your office is located. So there's an awful lot of power and control that is held by the party leaders, the majority party. And with that power and control comes money. And that money, a lot of money, comes from lobbyists and dark money. And those people have an agenda that they want advanced. And many times it is prioritized over and above what the people of Pennsylvania need, want, desire, or is a benefit for them. The US is the only major democracy in the world that allows politicians to have a say in drawing the district boundaries. It's an equal opportunity employer. What I mean by that is both parties will do it if they have the power and they have the opportunity. And a couple of examples of that, back in 2011 when they redistricted, over on the left side is something that looks a little bit like a praying mantis. And that district was drawn by the Democrats. That was a Democratic gerrymander in Maryland. And then on the other side of the screen, you'll see our infamous Goofy Kicking Donald, which was down in southeast Pennsylvania. That was the poster child for gerrymandering in 2011 and during the years following that. It was one of the worst gerrymanders in the country, and it was done by the Republicans. You probably are familiar with cracking. Cracking is taking a group of voters, the same political persuasion or the same interest or whatever, and putting them in lots of different districts. And so you're cracking them. You are minimizing their vote. You're marginalizing them, basically. And then another one is packing, which is the reverse of that. Basically, it is packing as many people of a political party or of an interest, whatever, in as few districts as possible. And so those districts might be very red or they might be very blue. However, they cannot affect the surrounding districts. Their votes cannot affect the surrounding districts. And then these next two, Buddy Mander and the one following that, may not be so familiar to you. A Buddy Mander is basically a handshake deal. It's an incumbent protection gerrymander where both parties agree to protect the incumbents of each other when they draw the maps. And then this last one, dummy mander, is pretty new. This is actually a gerrymander that backfires. And an example of that right now, Texas is in mid-cycle redistricting. They've changed their districts. They redistricted to get as many congressional districts in the Republican column as they possibly could. And so when you do a dummy mander, you kind of spread your voters pretty thin into many different districts to try to get those districts. And very possibly you might spread them too thin, and the opposing party, in this case the Democratic Party, might win some or all of those districts. And the same thing is true. They're doing the same thing in California. The same thing could potentially happen. But both parties gerrymander. You need to understand this. So let's connect the dots. Partisan redistricting, or AKA gerrymandering, leads to a lot of negative things. Uncompetitive districts, divided communities, extremes rewarded, moderation punished, gridlock, unfavored procedural rules, and this last one, voters' issues are really ignored. I could give you a list as long as my arm or longer of issues that have had bills introduced session after session after session that would benefit the public, and they go nowhere. They go to committee and die, or nothing ever happens with them. And so what basically, and a couple of examples that are lead abatement procedures, nurse practitioner rules, education, as far as education funding. And so really what you end up with gerrymandering is unaccountable government. Along the way, Fair Districts PA learned how unresponsive our state government truly is. We started advocating in 2016. Some groups, such as the League of Women Voters, had started advocating about this issue way back in the 1990s. But we have learned how unresponsive the government is. An example of that is in the 2017-18 session, House Bill 722 was introduced, and it had 110 co-sponsors, which is more than the majority in the House. Remember, the House has 203 seats with 110 co-sponsors. It was amended in committee. And what happened with this is a couple of the members of the committee wanted to enter a discharge petition to get the bill out of committee and on the floor for a vote. And so the chairman of the committee, that state government committee of the House, called a meeting with less than 24 hours notice. And that amendment that they did gave more control to the majority party. Basically, it gutted the bill, and it was never voted out of committee. It died. At the same time, Senate Bill 22, which was the same bill, except it was in the Senate, they had 21 co-sponsors, and it was amended in committee, and it did pass out of the Senate State Government Committee. And then it was amended on the Senate floor to include judicial districts. And what that means is that they wanted to have the Supreme Court, Superior Court, and Commonwealth Court justices voted on in districts as opposed to the current process where it is a statewide, we all vote on those jurists. And that would leave the those districts, those judicial districts, open to gerrymandering also. It did pass the Senate, and it went over to the House, and the House buried it under 600 plus amendments, and so it died also. So neither one of those bills went anywhere. And every session since then, we have not had action on our bills that we have supported, either in the House or in the Senate. They basically died in committee. In 2021, where are we now? In 2021, redistricting, public input, and attention made an absolutely huge difference. And a lot of that is attributed to what Fair Districts volunteers did. They educated the public, they educated legislators, and they were very, very instrumental in impacting this process, along with other groups, the League of Women Voters, Committee 70, Common Cause. And so it made a big difference, especially in the state legislative districts. The Legislative Reapportionment Commission, remember those 5 people that draw the state legislative districts, was headed by Chairman Mark Nordenberg, who was picked by the state Supreme Court. And the people of Pennsylvania really got lucky with him because he was very fair-minded and he was very transparency-oriented. He hosted 16 public hearings, held 7 public business meetings, invited 36 expert witnesses, heard from 145 citizen witnesses, received over 6,000 written testimony submissions, and considered over 100 district plans or parts of plans when they were drawing the districts. So a tremendous amount of transparency and fairness, basically, which had never been seen before in this process. So they were better, but there's still work to do. Okay? The process still remains the same. As far as the congressional districts, the majority party drew the map and submitted a bill. And it passed the Senate and it passed the House, and the governor vetoed the bill. And when the governor vetoes that bill, remember, it goes back to the state legislature and they're supposed to come up with a new bill that's acceptable. Well, the legislature and the governor could not agree on a new map. So what happened? Supreme Court of Pennsylvania took over and they asked for maps to be submitted. They looked at 13 maps that were submitted to them. They had hearings for 2 days down in Harrisburg, and then ultimately the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania picked the maps, the congressional maps. They were very similar to the maps used in 2018 and 2020, except that they had 1 less district. Instead of 18, they had 7. What do we need? We need a PA constitutional amendment to create an independent redistricting commission. The 2 bills that are introduced this session are House Bill 31 and Senate Bill 131. And basically what happens is 1 commission draws the congressional and state house and Senate districts. Just 1 commission does all of them. And it's based on these 3 legs of the stool, so to speak: commission independence, transparent public process, and prioritized mapping criteria. Currently, HB 31 resides in the House State Government Committee. It has not had a hearing or a vote. It does have 61 co-sponsors, 59 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And Senate Bill 131 resides in the Senate State Government Committee. Without a hearing or a vote, it has 20 co-sponsors, 18 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And that's of this date of March 9th, 2026. When you see this video, hopefully we have more co-sponsors, but we need a lot more co-sponsors, and we need people to advocate to have that happen. A summary of the 3-legged stool, if you will, so to speak, is commission independence. And the independence of the commission is reasonably representative of the Commonwealth's diversity and free from legislative influence in both the selection of commission members and the actions of the commission. The transparency part is that it would include public hearings, sharing of information about redistricting proposals, equal access to all data and information for both the general public and the commissioners. And as far as the prioritized mapping standards, provides clearly prioritized, measurable, widely accepted standards to promote equitable representation for counties, municipalities, communities of interest, with and it has defined limits on population deviation and attention to compactness, contiguity, and geographic boundaries. And if you want more information on the bills, you can certainly go to our website at fairdistrictspa.com. That our website has a tremendous amount of information, not just on the bills, but on all kinds of things. And so you would find a wealth of information there. The Independent Redistricting Commission itself would be made up of 11 members drawn from 3 pools of voters. One pool would be the voters registered with the largest political party in Pennsylvania. Another pool would be registered with the second largest political party in Pennsylvania. And the third pool is not registered with either of those parties. They're basically non-affiliated. Now, as I go through this, you may hear me call the pools buckets, so they're kind of interchangeable, pools and buckets. No politicians, elected officials, lobbyists, appointed political office holders, or immediate family are eligible to be commissioners. And the commission would, as much as possible, reflect the racial, gender, ethnic, and geographic diversity of the state of Pennsylvania. The selection process of these commissioners is done this way. The Secretary of State would advertise for applications, and they would be doing the initial screening of applicant applications. Their office would be doing the initial screening and screening out those that are not eligible. And then they would put those people in the three different buckets or pools. Okay. And then those buckets or pools go to the State Ethics Commission, and they would narrow down the pools to 60 in each pool. Okay. And then those pools would go to the majority and minority leaders of each chamber. And those people can, each one of those four people can strike two applicants from each pool. And then the remaining applicants in each pool would be in a random drawing. And the random drawing would be a public drawing. And that's where the first 6 members of the commission would be chosen randomly, 2 from each pool. And then those 6 commissioners would then select the remaining 5 members of the commission, 2 from the largest political party pool, 2 from the second largest political party pool, and 1 from the non-affiliated pool. PA constitutional amendments take an awful long time. The way that the process works in Pennsylvania is that the same bill has to pass the House and the Senate in 2 successive legislative sessions. The governor is not involved in passage of these bills, by the way. If the bill passes the House and the Senate in the 2 successive legislative sessions, it would go on a statewide ballot for voter referendum. So where are we now? We've had the introduction of HB 31 and SB 131 in the 25-26 legislative session. One of those bills has to pass the House and the Senate before early July of this year, 2026. If it does, it would be reintroduced in the 27-28 legislative session, and it would have to pass the House and the Senate again in that session by early July of 2028 at the latest. If that would all happen, then it would go on the ballot for referendum in November of 28 or November of 29 for voters to vote on. And if they voted yes in favor of independent citizen commission, the census happens in 2030 anyway, and the IRC could be formed and up and running in time for 2031 redistricting. It may seem like we have an awful long time to do this, but we really don't. We're in 2026 right now, 2031. Oh, that's 5 years away. No, because of the way that the process works and the time that it takes, we are really at a time crunch. If it does not pass in the 25-26 session, in other words, by early July of this year for the initial time, it would have to start over again in the 27-28 session for the initial passage. And it would have to be passed by early July of 2028. If it would be passed, then it would be introduced again in the 29-30 session, and it would have to pass by early July of 2030, and hopefully earlier than that. That doesn't leave an awful lot of time. That compresses the time, and it would be very, very difficult to get a commission up and running by 2031 if that was the case. So it's really, really important that the bill, one of those bills, gets passed before or by early July of this year. Despite better maps in 2021, there are no guarantees for the future. We can go back to the bad old days very easily because the same processes that gave us gerrymandering are still in place. And so the next 4 months in Pennsylvania are absolutely critical. No one knows who's going to control the PA House or the Senate. No one knows who will sit in the governor's office or hold the PA Supreme Court majority in 2031. Therefore, nobody knows who will have the final say in determining Pennsylvania's voting districts. What we do know is that when one party uses redistricting to hold control, the partisan divide grows deeper and voters' distrust increases. And so, unless advocates are loud, this is never going to happen. We need to get loud. We need you to make some noise and to advocate in any way that you possibly can. And if you want more information on how to advocate, ways to do that, or just more information in general, you can go to our website at fairdistrictspa.com. And there's also a QR code that you can see on the screen. This concludes the refresher session on redistricting and gerrymandering. We hope you found the information useful. And on behalf of Fair Districts PA, we thank you for listening and for your efforts to strongly advocate for redistricting reform and an independent citizen commission.